Good evening. How is everyone tonight? Good, and we're so glad you're here as we celebrate a major event in broadcasting, in public broadcasting, and connecting a public television station with its viewers, and even on the radio side, its listeners. This Ken Burns documentary, The War, is a pivotal broadcasting event, but not as pivotal, of course, as World War II and the sacrifices that so many Americans made, not only combat veterans, but people on the home front. And this is an opportunity, this Ken Burns documentary, for us to not only experience his work, but to also take a look at local experiences as it relates to World War II, the feelings that people experienced here in central Illinois, and their willingness right now to share those stories with us and with others. Because, as many of you know, there have been veterans who have been reluctant to talk about combat experiences during World War II. This is a great opportunity for all of us to learn what that experience was like and how we can use that experience to deal with problems that may arise in the future, and that's what history is all about. I welcome each and every one of you. My name is Carl Caldwell. I'm the station manager at WILL-TV, and I personally want to welcome all of you for this very, very special event tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And I'm Kimberly Cronick, the Outreach Coordinator at WILL, and I'm equally as glad to be here and to see all of you, each of you, and to work with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. They have been a great partner. Mark Depew and Sabrina and Sam and others have just been fabulous. We really appreciate that everyone is here tonight. We hope this will be an interactive event tonight, that you will feel free and welcome to talk with the folks who are willing to share their stories with you. You'll be able to do that both live tonight, as well as you'll see some video that we made where they share their stories. We tried real hard to present both the soldiers who were overseas fighting and the people at home who were sacrificing as well. So we appreciate and honor everyone who served at a time in history that is unlike any other that we have experienced since. WILL, along with the museum and library, are collecting the oral histories of veterans and civilians. We're doing this because folks are getting up in age, and they're willing to tell their stories, and we want those stories for future scholars to have students in classrooms know more about history. You may not know this, but many of our students believe that we were allies with Germany in World War II. So by having this primary history, we can teach in a more localized way a world event, and that's one of our goals. WILL has heard from over 70 people who've called us and said we want to share our stories of World War II, and we are interviewing those folks. The museum and library are doing the same. So we're very, very pleased to be here and to capture some of those stories. So thank you again for coming. We hope you will visit our website. If you are so inspired tonight that you want to tell your story, please talk to one of us or go to our website and you can actually directly post your story, or you can call it in. We've had both veterans and their family members calling. We like the idea of how this spurs intergenerational dialogue. Many people are talking to their families in ways they have never talked with them before, and we think that's a valuable thing. So right now I would like to introduce our partner in this event, who's been a fabulous partner, Mark Depew, who's the Director of Oral History here at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. Mark?
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you, Carl, especially. On behalf of Dr. Rick Beard, who's the director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, and my boss, Dr. Tom Schwartz, who is the state historian, I welcome one and all this evening. I think we've got a great crowd, and I'm really looking forward to the chance to hear more from our panel members and to have a dialogue, a discussion, if you will. I'd like to especially thank Carl Caldwell. Kimberly Cronick, and the rest of the folks at WILL and Champaign to giving us the opportunity to partner with you on such an important event as the debut, so to speak, of the Ken Burns documentary, The War. Now, we've got the house lights turned down a little bit, but I'm going to throw a curveball at our panel members as I introduce them very briefly, and we'll talk more about them. There we go. We'll talk more about them when they come up as the panel members, but first of all, George and Dorothy Cordier, if you could stand, please, and let the audience see you. Ruth Whittington Lockhart. And Sandy Daner Wheeler. Thank you. This is an important day for me and for the library's new oral history program. It's something of a debut for us, the first public event that will highlight interviews conducted by the program. The interviews you will be seeing excerpts from tonight are just the beginning of an ambitious oral history program that was launched just 1 year ago. We spent the first year putting the pieces of the program together, picking the brains of some of the best oral historians in the country, purchasing equipment, designing and initiating several oral history projects, and training volunteer interviewers and transcribers, and putting all of the administrative pieces together as well. We have also begun to conduct interviews now in earnest. They're not just with veterans. Subjects range from agriculture to Illinois politics to veterans interviews and historians who have written Illinois' history. The interviews we've conducted to date are available to the general public in the library's audiovisual department. As this is a research library, we ask that you call to make appointments at 217-558-8891. And no, I don't expect you to memorize that number. We have a table outside with all the information you need if you'd like to visit the library to hear these interviews. But I know you didn't come here tonight to hear about all of that. You've come, I suspect, because you're very interested in World War II, and also to get a sneak peek of Ken Burns' The War. Based on the excerpts I've seen, I think you'll be fascinated by his narrative of the war, just as you were Burns' documentaries on the Civil War, on baseball, on jazz, and the West. Burns has a penchant for picking those events in American history that have transformed and defined us as Americans. This is most certainly true for this documentary. For those of you who are there, be it overseas or back in the Straits, World War II and perhaps the Great Depression that preceded it were the transformative events and moments of your lives. We cannot understand them without understanding these events. To tell his story this time, Burns has decided to use the intimate memories of those who lived through it, focusing on 4 American communities: Waterbury, Connecticut, Mobile, Alabama, Sacramento, California, and Laverne, Minnesota. We've added a 5th area to that, Central Illinois. We also chose to feature not just the veterans themselves, but also those who stayed behind, who manned the factories and waited for the loved ones to return. You'll see just a small portion of those interviews Sandy Wheeler and I conducted. The full version of these interviews is available in our audiovisual department, as I mentioned before, along with the transcripts. I encourage you to make the visit. There is very little about the Ken Burns documentary of World War II that is sanitized or romantic. I'll caution the audience up front that there are excerpts that you'll see tonight that will include some graphic images. Those are pretty early in the excerpt that you're going to see. What the documentary does do, however, is remind us of just how much those experiences of the war, whether on the battlefield or in Europe and Asia, or for those who spent the war toiling and waiting at home, how those people sacrificed and the debt of gratitude that we owe them today. If I may, I'd like to address the rest of my remarks to those of you who remember the war, and especially to the members of what we now call the Greatest Generation, an appellation which I'm sure many of you are rankled by. You didn't choose to live through the Great Depression, and you certainly didn't choose to go to war. 1 month prior to Pearl Harbor, the American public overwhelmingly desired to stay out of Europe's troubles and the Pacific's as well. But the day after the Japanese attack in December of 1941, you knew what had to be done. You rose to the challenge. You came together, fought in a cause you believed in to your core. In those dark early days of the war, the outcome was anything but certain. You just knew that America had to win. Too much was at stake. Some 12 million Americans eventually served in the military out of a population of 132 million. Everyone knew someone in the service. Everyone felt they had to do something to help, however small. That's what motivated Ruth Whittington of tiny Herrick, Illinois, to take a job as a riveter. That's how Mona Daner and Dorothy Cordier coped with rationing and separation and raising small children during the war. For George Cordier, Tony DeVito, and Frederick Daner, their way of helping was to serve overseas. All three were drafted, and all three served honorably for a cause they believed in. Your generation laid it all on the line for victory, and over 400,000 of your generation paid the ultimate price for that cause. Because of your courage and sacrifice, you defeated a fearsome enemy and preserved our freedoms and way of life. You came out of the war sobered by the experiences, but also solidly optimistic about the future, ready to move on with your lives, and boy, did you ever move on with your lives. You returned to America's farms and factories and businesses. Many of you went to school, courtesy of the GI Bill. Because of your efforts, you helped feed the world, finance the Marshall Plan, and help with the rebirth of Europe and Japan. You gave birth to a generation of baby boomers. Yours is the generation of joiners and doers, the generation that led America through the Cold War and beyond. Quite frankly, those of us who have come after you have become a bit pampered and somewhat complacent by the abundance you helped create. But I know that many of you also struggled to put the war behind you, to purge the painful memories, to avoid the subject when your inquisitive children asked about the war. Then came the 60s. By then, my generation wasn't much interested in hearing your stories of the war. We had our own war to make sense of, and many of us never quite did make sense of it. So it's been only in these last few years that many of you have finally begun to share your memories with us, that the rest of us have been interested enough to hear them and to understand and appreciate their significance. Hopefully through your stories, preserved in oral history collections throughout America, we can begin to appreciate what it was like to live through that time, to have risked it all, to have lost so much and yet have triumphed in the end. We have much we can learn from you. That's why oral histories are so vitally important. That's why we think our program here at Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, the Oral History Program, is so vitally important. Your stories give us the opportunities to understand the war firsthand, to experience events from those of you who lived through them, who've been there. And for that reason, I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm thrilled to be able to debut this series by Ken Burns, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. So without further ado, what we'll do is cue up the first excerpt from the Ken Burns film. Thank you.
One evening in the summer of 1941, several months before the United States would be drawn into the Second World War, in a little farming town in Alabama, a 16-year-old high school boy named Glenn Dowling Frazier discovered that the girl he loved was interested in someone else. Frazier was so angry and upset that when the owner of a juke joint refused him service, he stalked outside, climbed onto his motorcycle, and roared through the door, shattering bottles and smashing furniture. As he raced away, the bar owner chased him down the street with a shotgun. The next morning, humiliated, scared, and unable to face his parents, Glenn Frazier went to the nearest recruiting office, lied about his age, and joined the peacetime army. He volunteered to serve in the Philippines.
When I volunteered for the Philippine Islands, I had no idea that we would actually be in war. I was thinking that probably Germany was the most likely place that there would be a war. So in my mind, I thought it'd be safe over there. I never thought Japan would be attacking us.
Over the next 4 years, Frazier would find himself in the midst of war. Desperate hand-to-hand combat. A forced march so brutal, the world would never forget it. And nightmarish prison camps, where simply surviving required luck and bravery and unshakable will. Back in Alabama, those who loved him would be told he was dead. All Glenn Frazier would be able to do was cling to the hope that one day he could come back home.
I don't think there is such a thing as a good war. There are sometimes necessary wars. And I think one might say just wars. And that I never questioned the necessity of that war, and I still do not question it. It was something that had to be done.
The greatest cataclysm in history grew out of ancient and ordinary human emotions. Anger and arrogance and bigotry. Victimhood and the lust for power. And it ended because other human qualities, courage and perseverance and selflessness, faith, leadership, and the hunger for freedom combined with unimaginable brutality to change the course of human events. The Second World War brought out the best and the worst in a generation and blurred the two so that they became at times almost indistinguishable. In the killing that engulfed the world from 1939 to 1945, between 50 and 60 million people died. So many, and in so many different places, that the real number will never be known. More than 85 million men and women served in uniform, but the overwhelming majority of those who perished were civilians. Men, women, and children obliterated by the arithmetic of war. The United States of America was relatively fortunate. More than 405,000 soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines died. But that figure represented proportionately fewer military casualties than were suffered by any of the other major combatants. American cities were not destroyed. American civilians were never really at risk. But without American power, without the sacrifice of American lives, the struggle's outcome would have been very different. The American economy only grew stronger as the fighting went on. And by the time it ended, the United States would be the most powerful nation on earth. And a once isolated and insular people would find themselves at the center of world affairs. The war touched every family, on every street, in every town in America. Towns like Laverne, Minnesota, Sacramento, California, Waterbury, Connecticut, and Mobile, Alabama. And nothing would ever be the same again.
I'm not sure I can speak about why human beings in general go to war. I think that's a pretty large category. I can only speak about why 18-year-olds from Minneapolis go to war. They go to war because it's impossible not to. Because a current is established in the society so swift, flowing toward war, that every young man who steps into it is carried downstream.
You won't be surprised that Ken Burns has spent many, many years working on this particular project, and probably in some cases it feels like a lifetime. The next excerpts we have are from our panel members themselves, plus one other gentleman, Tony DeVito, who lives up in Chicago, who isn't able to be here tonight. I think it's approximately 13 minutes long, and you can see that even locally here, we have some very high-quality people to do the filming for us, and their stories are wonderful, and they're worth hearing. So without further ado, here are our excerpts of our interviews. Thank you.
I was driving a bus in Canton, Ohio, the morning that we heard the news that they had bombed Pearl Harbor.
And what flashed through your mind when you heard that?
We're going to be at it. So I just kept working until my number come up in the draft.
We were listening to the radio on Sunday, and they broke through and told about Pearl Harbor. My thoughts was it was terrible. It was a terrible thing.
I was at home on the farm, but then when the war broke out, being very patriotic, I thought I should do something like a lot of the other women were doing. So that's when I left the farm, and I had a sister living in Chicago, and I decided to go up there and see what I could do, helping out during the war.
Because my father and my uncle were in business together, the draft board said to them, one of you will go and one of you will stay and support the two families, which created quite a disagreement among the wives. My Aunt Wilma and my mother were kind of at odds about who would end up going. My uncle was younger than my father, and of course my father was saying, I'll go, I'm the oldest, and Uncle Heine would say, but I'm younger, I should go. Bottom line, it came down that my father left, was inducted at age 36. So that would have made Uncle Heine about 34. But Daddy thought that they wouldn't take him because he had flat feet. That was always the Daner lore, that they wouldn't take him because he had flat feet. Well, they did. And they put arch supports in his shoes and his boots.
I worried because I had a small child to take care of, no income, no job. But fortunately, the company that he worked for offered me a job as an information clerk at the bus station in Canton, Ohio. Mm-hmm. George left one day before Richard's first birthday.
I must have been on a play date or something. And I came home, it was late in the afternoon, and my mother was hysterical. And I'll never forget it. Interestingly enough, when I was taking psychology in college, they asked me what my first childhood memory of my mother was. And that was it. And I found my mother absolutely out of control with hysteria about my daddy going. I had a very young brother. He was in arms. He was somewhere between 3 and 6 months old. So, you know, there we were, a 4-year-old, a 6-and-a-half-year-old, and a baby. Mother was very, very lonely, and she tried really hard to keep busy and keep things going. We had a dear friend, Mary, who was a dress shop operator, and she and Mother became friends, and as a result, Mary came and lived with us while Daddy was overseas. So we literally had another mother. And you know, the things that daddies do. We had a coal furnace. You got to go down in the morning and stoke the furnace and get it ready for the day, and then you have to go take the ashes out. Well, Mother didn't have that, so Daddy had arranged for this lovely gentleman, he was black, to come every morning. His name was Davis, and he would take care of the furnace for us. And my Uncle Carl, who was the only one in the family that had a car, and he had no children, so he became a second daddy for us.
I think he got around about $50 or $60 a month at that time. He had asked the government to send me $50 of it, and he only kept $10. Otherwise, I didn't have anything coming in outside of what I'd worked.
Well, let me tell you how we did it. 1 week, one bought the food. 1 week, one did the dishes. One did the housework, and one did the laundry. That's we had. It was a routine. That's the way we did it. We all paid our share.
With the rationing and the coupons, and I can remember, you know, you couldn't get butter. The thing that you got was like a tub of lard, and you got a little red bean that you put in there and made margarine, and it was always a big treat to be able to whip it up. It's just one of those yeah. Things that I remember. You know, sugar was rationed, gasoline was rationed. Of course, that didn't make any difference to us. We never had a car. We didn't have a car until my baby sister was born many, many, many years later.
Well, then I went to the American Aircraft Institute and learned how to rivet. And I graduated from there. I did layout, blueprints, and so forth. Then after that is when I received my job at Howard Aircraft. The one I worked on, it was called the Nightingale G3. They were Navy trainers, 4 to 5 passenger Navy trainers.
I never had a weapon in my life prior to getting in the Marine Corps. And on the rifle range, I scored a sharpshooter, which is second highest. The expert rifleman is the highest.
We had to take care of all the wires, stringing wires to some of the companies that were set up on the beach. And if there was any problems, we had to go out and find out what the problems were. Then on the third morning, they had a report, reported a wire was out. So they sent my buddy and myself out to trace it down and try to repair it. And we were out cruising around there with the wire, trying to find it, and they were lobbing the mortars and machine guns and so forth. And pretty soon we heard a whistle coming, and somebody yelled, "Here comes one," and it came. That's all I remember. I woke up, I was down on the beach and being loaded into another boat to take us back out to one of the ships that was docked in the bay. Till this day, I still don't know what happened to my buddy. I don't know if he ever got killed or wounded or what happened to him. And the worst part of it is I can't even remember what his name was, which has been bothering me ever since.
The first thing I saw when I landed on the island was rows and rows of dead Marines being taken off the beach. They probably had all been killed on D-Day, because that's when the firing from the Japanese was the heaviest. The day I got shot, we had a tank that was in front of us doing shell fire. Didn't seem to disturb anything, because when we got there, these Japanese were in this cave, and they were throwing grenades out. They were shooting. I wanted to get some cover, and before I got to it, I got shot, and they took me away from the vicinity. Naturally, brought me to a field hospital. I was shot high in the arm. It went through the bone. It went through the nerves. I couldn't move my fingers, my left fingers, and when they flew me to Guam the next day, in the hospital there, and they put a body cast on me and a cast on my left arm. I felt I was lucky because I survived. And there's a lot more people with worse injuries than I have. Just losing the use of your left arm is not as bad as using the use of both legs.
My mother used to go to bed before she'd say her prayers. She'd say her prayers every night. She prayed for Daddy to get sick and be sent home. And that's what happened. My mother's prayers were answered, and she blamed herself for many, many, many years, as he had to go through a process every year to maintain his disability. He actually got a lung fungus in Bougainville, which turned into pleurisy. Very, very painful lung situation. And they shipped him to San Diego, and from San Diego they shipped him to a hospital in Georgia, and then from the hospital in Georgia they sent him to a hospital at Camp Atterbury in Indiana. He was overseas 7 months, and he got back in the States in December '44, and he wasn't discharged until June 22nd.
Of 45.
1945.
Okay.
And he was in the hospital all that time. And my mother nor the children got to see him. He was glad to be home. You know, whatever it took. I'm absolutely positive that was, he was praying as hard as she was on the other end, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe not to get sick, probably not to get shot.
Yeah. But he never blamed her.
No, not at all.
They put me aboard this ship, and we went back down to Espiritu Santos in the New Hebrides, and that's where I was in the hospital for about 3 months.
He was in the hospital, I think, for 2 or 3 months, and then I think he went back to Guam or something or the other, but he ended up being in the Philippines as a cook for some generals and lieutenants. From what I understand, one of the generals said something about, George, you don't want to go back to fighting, do you? And George says, no, I don't. So they gave him a cook's job.
I was cooking then for the general, 2 full colonels, and 2 first lieutenants. And we lived in a house in Manila. And that was my duty then. And that was a good job, believe me. It turned out to be.
Well, World War II was a fight for survival, and it was a total war. And I think war should be, if you're going to have a war, it should be fought like World War II was, where you fight to crush the enemy, get the war over with, and then have peace.
I know that my father was a changed man when he came home. I know that the war changed him, all for the better. 1,000% for the better. He became a better father, he became a better husband. I think he thanked God every day that he lived through it.
I can truthfully say that I'm happy that they did drop those 2 atomic bombs, because if they hadn't, not only Japan, but this country would have lost a whole lot of good men.
I think you can tell what a wonderful honor it's been to interview these people and to hear their stories, and just how important and compelling the stories are. What I'd like to do now is to ask our panel members to come up, please. And what we're going to do is I'll have a short conversation with them up here, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience, because I'm sure many of you have questions as well. So if you don't, start thinking of some, please. Some of you probably aren't any more used to these bright lights than I am.
No, that's for sure.
I am.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you would be.
What I thought I would start with here to kind of get us going, and this might be something of a surprise for you, Sandy, but a little bit of history, if you will. I got to my position in September of 2006, and December I heard about an event at VFW Post 755 that Sandy had put together. And so, Sandy, what I'd like to do was start a little bit with you and ask you, how does a daughter of a World War II veteran suddenly become very passionate about this subject and decide to start interviewing veterans?
Well, it had to do with the building of the new Illinois World War II Memorial. My friend Don Beck and I served on a board together for Gateway Foundation, and he called me one day and said, you know, we need somebody to help us. And I said, well, Don, I'm running the golf tournament. I'm raising money every day. I can't raise money for 2 things.
Well, let me do what an oral historian is not supposed to do and interrupt you.
Yet you taught me that.
Yeah, and remind the audience that Sandy ran the Rail Golf Classic. More, you would prefer the State Farm Golf Classic
Always
for
gotta
27
talk
years.
about the sponsor. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I politely declined to be on the board, but I, as my husband says, I commandeered him. My husband, Bill, who's sitting right down here, with his experience in radio and television, he became the publicity director for the World War II Memorial, and I said, I will be behind the scenes and help with as much as I can. So I pretty much have produced and directed all the special events for the memorial, which has been such a pleasure. If any of you were there for the day of the dedication, you know that it was a very, very special time for our Illinois veterans. December 7th, this past December 7th, I suggested to the board of the memorial that we might do something to start talking about the women and the wives and the women that were in the factories and the women that were in the military. And I can remember Larry Edwards, who was the first president of the Memorial Board, said, well, it's Pearl Harbor Day. I said, well, Larry, we're going to talk about the men, but I think it's time to start talking about the women. Well, there was a gentleman in the audience that day that came up to me right after it and introduced himself. And from there, it was December, and it was a snowball. It was an uphill snowball, but one that has filled me with such pride to be able to work with Mark and the dedication of what we're doing with oral history, and to put this evening together. I want you to know that the excerpts that you've seen tonight, most of those interviews are an hour long. So as Mark told you early, you should come down and ask to see the whole interview, because it's just been a wonderful experience, and it has allowed me, as the daughter of a veteran, to relive those moments in time, and it brought back the happiness of having him home, but it also brought back the tears as I remembered what we lived through. And I would like to introduce my eldest sister who lived through it with me, Sharon. Sharon Daner, Marcy back there.
I'd also like to take the opportunity to, Sandy mentioned that there are some people here who participated in that construction of the World War II memorial. If we could have you stand up as well.
Oh, please. Don, raise your hand.
I always have found it rather ironic that we build a memorial for Vietnam, and then Korea,
Yep.
and then World War II.
Well, they have been an inspiration for me, and it's been such joy to know them and to work with them. And there is a reason that they are called, and I know it's a little overused now, but it's in my heart. They are the greatest generation.
Well, let's take it back to the events of the war itself. And George, I'm going to start with you. You're a young man in Canton, Ohio, right?
Right.
Driving a bus.
Yep, Blue Ridge Lines out of Canton, Ohio.
And how much had you considered going into the military before Pearl Harbor happened?
Oh, every now and then I thought about it, but I didn't think it was for me. I had a lot of buddies that was in the Marine Corps previously, before the war, and they were good buddies, and I was always considering the Marine Corps if I did go into the service. So whenever I got the chance, they drafted, they gave me a choice, and I thought about the Army. Well, they're going to go over to Europe, and it's awful damn cold over there. And I want to go to the Pacific where it's warm. So that's where I went, where it's warm and a lot of hula girls, I thought. But anyhow, that's how I got into the Marine Corps and served over in the Pacific.
And Dorothy, I wondered if you could tell us just a little bit about how the two of you met. And this was early 1941, as I recall.
We met in a bus station. I was cashier there, and he came in from Pennsylvania, and all at once we dated, and it wasn't too long afterwards, I think in only about 2 months, and we were married.
Her mother gave us 6 months.
Yes,
And this month, we're going to be celebrating our 66th wedding anniversary.
No, Dorothy, I know that when George went off to boot camp, I guess that was Parris Island. That's where good Marines go on the East Coast.
That's where the fighting Marines go.
Oh, okay.
Hollywood had the Marines that does all the film for the movie industry on battles.
The ones in the Pacific are the ones in the West Coast are the ones in the films then, huh?
Yeah, yep.
Anyway, I don't want to start a riot here, so we'll avoid that any further. Dorothy, I understand when he came back from boot camp, he was a little bit changed. How was he
Yes.
changed?
When he went in, he weighed something like 225 pounds. 6 weeks later, he came in, and I waited for him at the train station. Some little Marine tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked there, and I said, "Fresh Marine." Tapped me again, and he says, "Hon, it's me." He had lost, I don't know how many pounds, but he was 160 pounds after that. In 6 weeks, he had lost all that weight.
Incidentally, in those pictures, that little fellow that was sitting on my shoulder, he's sitting right down here
Right there.
in the second row. But he wanted to sit on my shoulder now, but I said no. Along with his wife, Carol.
Well, one more question for you, Dorothy. Was he as handsome when he came back from boot camp as you thought he was before he left?
He's handsome. He's still handsome.
He's still handsome, absolutely.
Now, there's a diplomatic answer. Ruth, I would think that a young girl growing up in Herrick, this is a small town, this is the late 30s and early 40s, being a riveter, going off to the big city of Chicago is probably not what your dad and mom had in mind for you, was it?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. But being patriotic as I was during the war, I knew that we had to do something to win this war. And that's what I wanted to do, was to go to Chicago, where my sister was. And that's when, then after I entered in Chicago, for a little while, I went to American Aircraft Institute and learned how to rivet and got a job with Howard Aircraft.
Can you imagine this little person, Rosie the Riveter?
Now, when you first started this job, was there all this talk that we've heard about ever after about Rosie the Riveter? Was that a phrase that you heard a lot about when you first started training?
Well, yes then, but not now.
Okay.
You tell somebody right now that you are Rosie the Riveter, they say, "What's that?" Really, that's true.
Well, hopefully that's part of what we can fix about this.
But there is a museum in Richmond, California, for Rosie the Riveters.
Well, it's a wonderful contribution.
And I must tell you, when I did the riveting, I riveted the cowlings on the airplane. That's the belly of the airplane. And you had to do it just right. If you riveted wrong, you had to drill that rivet back out and do it over again. And most of the planes, after they were done, were tested at Midway Airport in Chicago. And back then, I only made 77 cents an hour and thought I was rich.
Were you able to spend all that 77 cents, or did you save some of that?
Well, I had to spend it.
Well, and you used to go on Sundays. Where'd you go on
We
Sundays?
would go down to the Chicago Theater and hear Sammy Kaye swing and sway. That was every sermon.
Well, I wanted to take it back to Sandy here before we turn it over to the audience and your questions. Sandy, I'd like to have you tell just a little bit of the story, and I think you recall the one I'm talking about. On the event, the day of the dedication of the World War II memorial here in Springfield itself, and the image of the Marine, if you would.
Well, John Kerrigan, who's here this evening, who's the president of the memorial, in his speech recognized all the different services and asked those people to stand. And there was a gentleman, we had a place down in front for people in wheelchairs, and there was a gentleman that was wheeled down in front, and he was all bundled up, and he had his overseas cap on, and he never opened his eyes. But he was right there where I could see him the whole time. And when John got to the Marines, this gentleman just raised his arm. That's all he did. He never opened his eyes. He was there to celebrate what we were celebrating. It was a very, very touching moment.
Okay.
Now, I got a couple things I want to add.
Okay, go ahead.
You know you're not going to shut me up. Daddy had just turned 36 when he was drafted, and they called him Pops. And when he was in the Philippines, Daddy was a pretty good cook, and that word got out, and they would go steal chickens and snakes and whatever and bring them back, and Daddy would cook in his steel pot. And I think Sharon and I are both very unhappy that we never talked to Daddy more about his experiences. Had he lived long enough to be a part of this thing, I'm sure we would have heard a lot more. We don't know why we have none of the V-mails that he used to send with the censors, but we have all of the letters that Mother wrote to Daddy. And my sisters and I have passed these around, and it certainly has been an experience for me. The letter that you saw on the screen, obviously at 4 years old, I didn't write that, but that was my way of signing my name. I think our neighbor, Betty Coogan, wrote that. But Sharon has a story. She wrote to Daddy, and Daddy put that letter in his billfold, and when he came home, he had it in his billfold, and Sharon has it today.
What I'd like to do now, I'm going to get up and grab one of the microphones on the side here. We have a microphone on either side, and we'll be glad to take your questions. We'd ask that either you make your way to one of these microphones on the side, or I can pass it down the aisle, and that would be fine as well. So go ahead and just take a second to do that. So who do we have with the first question? Right here, sir.
In interviewing the veterans, did you find that many of them or some of them were reticent to talk about their experiences?
I can't hear him if he's speaking to me.
George, he said in interviewing the veterans, were the veterans reticent to talk about it? And I think I can speak to this because there is a roundtable now at the Vet Center in Springfield. And George, how many people come to your meeting?
Oh, between 30 and 40.
At every meeting?
We
And-
started out with 3. I was one of the original members of it. 2 of them has passed away, but we have about 30 now that attends. And we really get some good stories from the veterans.
And I think that speaks to what's happening now. I think they want their stories to be heard, and it's a good thing, a very good thing.
I can't hear him.
I want to say a few words about that one as well. I'm also interviewing a lot of Korean War veterans here lately and have been doing this quite a bit over the last few years. And it takes a certain moment in your life, like Sandy and George said, when you're ready to do this, when you're ready to tell your stories. But a lot of the people don't want to tell everything. Some of them don't want to talk about it much at all. That's why they had kept these memories to themselves for so long. Or maybe more appropriately, they'd been trying to forget. In fact, just in the last 2 days, I had a POW from World War II who called me and said, you know, I was going to talk to you, but I don't think I can deal with it. And I talked to a gentleman today, a Korean War veteran, who told me the same thing. A month ago, he was okay. Curious case, he had been in Korea in 1950 when the American Army got brutalized by the Chinese, and he went back in 1953. And before today, he was willing to talk about what happened in 1953. He refused to talk about 1950. Well, today he told me he didn't want to talk about either year. So these are tough things for them to deal with, and as historians, we have to respect that, because they have to live with these memories after we stir them up again. So it's something that we have to balance. Next question. I'll just repeat the question here. The question is, at these roundtable discussions you have, George, are they recording the interviews?
I can't,
Are they recording your conversations at the Vet Center?
oh, no.
I guess you can take that any way you want.
And maybe if the recording started, the stories would change. I don't know. Other questions out there? I'll get the microphone back to you here.
Don back there wants something to say.
Sandra? I want you to address the fact that it wasn't only the World War II veterans that built the memorial. We had the assistance of very, very capable non-veterans. Without them, it would not have come to conclusion. Would you name a couple of the civilians that made this all come true? It wasn't just the veterans.
Well, I think you can help me with that. We had the 2 Johns. We had John Kerrigan and John Getz. And I'm awfully proud of what my husband did, Bill Wheeler. And it takes a village, and you had one. And we got it done. Was there somebody else you wanted to mention, Don?
No, that was it. Just
that it wasn't just veterans that did the job.
Stand up, John Kerrigan.
came out of-
You
it
are
came out of a
an
group of
unusual
veterans
young
getting
man.
together.
Yeah, this young man has been the driving force for several years.
John Kerrigan. And John Getz is president of R.D. Lawrence.
Correct.
His company built the Vietnam Memorial, and I went to him and asked him to join our group, and he joined our group.
Well, that's what we said, Don. It was all your fault. you went around and went this one, this one, this one, and this one.
Thank you. I just wanted to be sure that he was recognized.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I'm just glad we had two Johns instead of one John.
Mr. Cordier, the Japanese had the worldwide renown of being very brutal and sadistic during the war, and I was wondering if you had any hatred, and if you did have any hatred for the Japanese, how you were able to let the hatred go.
Oh, I have no hatred against them. Just only whenever we met up with them. Otherwise, I saw a lot of dead ones, but I didn't kill any.
Question for George. How did you first hear of Hiroshima, the atomic bomb being dropped, and were there any rumors ahead of time?
Did you get that, George?
No, I have a problem hearing, so.
He said, when did you first hear about Hiroshima, and had you heard any rumors ahead of time about the bomb?
Oh, no, I didn't hear about Hiroshima till whenever after it happened. I was down in Manila, and they had a big celebration down in Manila, but that's the first I knew about it.
I had the experience of visiting the memorial at Hiroshima, and it was the first time I was ever able to do a tour that they had the taped information. And of course, the Japanese were always ahead in technology. So I had a Pepsi in my hand as I walked through there, and the whole modus operandi of that museum was the children. The children, the children, the children. And you had, by the time I got to the end, I was nauseated, and then I had to stop and think, we didn't start this. But that whole park is memorials to the mothers and the children, and across the street is the building that we've all seen in the pictures with the body that's there on the concrete in form. It was a mind-boggling experience.
I'd like to say something about Paul Winter. You know, he was a Methodist minister.
Yes.
And I think he was instrumental also with this World War II memorial. And also we made about 8 or different churches with Paul Warner, with veterans, on a Sunday. So I think we owe him a lot of credit. Thank you.
Talking about Paul Wanger.
Yeah. I had, Tony, I had talked to Paul about coming to this, and he said he was thinking about it, but I don't see him around, or maybe he forgot about it. He's retired now, so he's taking it.
So he's entitled to forget, right?
Yeah.
I'm Larry Edwards. I was the first president of the World War II Illinois Veterans Memorial. I can say this, it was a wonderful experience. And we started with zero money, and we were told after we worked on it for about a year, you'll never get it built. And I told them we used the same spirit we used when we was fighting the war, and it worked. And I might mention briefly my experiences. I was with the 41st Infantry Division, participated in 3 amphibious landings, never was wounded, ended up in the hospital with diseases, is all. And you mentioned Hiroshima. Our outfit did a job of occupying the Hiroshima area which was quite an experience. And the Japanese treated us wonderful. I had an interpreter riding with me every day in the Jeep, and he had been educated here in the United States, and it went smooth as the clock. And General MacArthur done an outstanding job of occupying Japan. He sent in a task force every place our troops landed, and all the civilians was off the street when we arrived. The only people on the street was the police wearing sabers, standing at attention. And it was quite an experience.
Mark?
I'm thinking it's time to interview him sometime.
Yes, he's certainly on the list, and I think we want to encourage people to do that. But at this point, maybe we should ask all the veterans that are here tonight to stand.
I think that's a wonderful idea. If you're able to do that, if you please
Come on,
stand and be
vets,
recognized.
let's see you.
And for those who are veterans in the military afterwards, if you please stand.
Bill?
Do you have a question? Did you want to ask a question?
I was veteran from the very first day when the war started, September 1st, 1939. At that time, I wore different uniform, but we were fighting the same enemy. I was in Polish army during the war. And we didn't have a chance when Germany attacked us September 1st from the west. On September 17, Soviet Union invaded us from the east. So I became prisoner of war by Soviet Union. First I was on the Western Front against Germany, but I ended up on the Eastern Front, and I became prisoner of war by the Soviet Union. They sent us to Siberia. But at that time, Hitler and Stalin were friends. They divided Poland among themselves, and they decided to exchange a prisoner of war. Because I was born in the western part of Poland, which was occupied by the Germans, the Russians sent me to Germany. And there I was prisoner of war till April the 16th, 1945, when Americans came in and I was liberated by Omar Bradley. And when the war ended, they told us, now you can go home, you can go to Poland. I said, there is no Poland. You took away from Germans, you gave it to the Russians.
I have no idea.
So I decided to emigrate to the United States. It took me 6 years before I was called by American consul. And he said, after careful investigation, they found out that you are eligible to be admitted to the United States because of my past. Where would you like to go to the United States? Yeah, I said, to the United States. Yeah, he said, United States is a big country. We have 48 states. Don't you have any preference? I said, what's the difference? Oh, he said, there's a big difference. They have warm climate, cold climate, and something in between. I said, okay, put me in between. So he said, okay, I put you, so just about in the middle, the state of Illinois. This state is very well developed. It's industrial, agricultural. and commercial. And there is one big city. There is Chicago. There is big Polish settlement, and a big German settlement. So he said, you get acclimatized very easy. I said, sir, if I would want to live among Polish people, I would go to Poland. If I would want to live among German people, I would stay here. If I go to America, I want to live among American people. So he said, okay, I put you right down in the middle of state of Illinois. Capital city, Springfield. Oh, he said, it's nice, it's easy to pronounce, Springfield. And so I got established here till today. And I plan to stay here.
Well, we're pretty darn lucky to get you here in Springfield, it sounds like. And these are the kind of stories I get to hear all the time. And you listen to these stories and you walk away from these interviews and you think to yourself, man, how lucky have I been to live in this country? And I can't even begin to comprehend the things that you went through or so many other people that I get to talk to. It just overwhelms me many times. So thank you very much. I think you and I need to get together sometime.
Is he from Springfield?
Thank you for being here. I've got a couple questions over here.
My question is for Sandy Wheeler. First of all, I want to tell you that I am the daughter of a World War II veteran, so I share that with you. And I want to know what memories you have of your father's homecoming.
Well, it was in the middle of the night, and my daddy was dark-headed, very dark brown, not black, with very little gray. But when he walked in, he had a mustache, and it was red. And my mother wouldn't even kiss him until he shaved it off. And our baby brother said, "Who's that man, Mommy?" Did I get it right, Sharon? That's exactly what happened. I can see him standing in the living room today. What about you? What were your memories? Oh, well, you and my baby sister should talk.
Okay, I know I had one down here somewhere. Yeah, right here.
Ruth, my question's for you. I'm also from Herrick, Illinois. So I think I sort of understand what it must have been like to leave there and go to Chicago. And I was wondering if you remember my dad, who's about your age. His name's John Jones.
John
Jones.
John
Oh,
Jones?
sure. Yes. Didn't he live at Rochester?
No, he said
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he passed away 3
Yes,
years
he passed away. Oh, yes, I knew John.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Ruth.
That's John's daughter.
Yes.
It's like old home week here. Loving it.
Yes. I'd like to tell you about my wife's uncle, my father-in-law's brother. He was in the Philippines like that first man, that guy talked about earlier. And he had no churches over there. He started his own church, and they had weeds to eat, about all they had to eat, and roots. And then he went all through that war and lost a lot of them, went down all skinny. And he came to town here on the railroad, and the whole city, we got the newspapers at home, the whole city is jammed full of people the first night.
When the war was over, you mean?
When the war was over, his name was Henry Piontek. My father-in-law was John Piontek. The Piontek brothers. I always thought that was a great story. And before the war, he had sent, 3 months before the war in the Philippines,
you sent postcards and shells or something. My wife's got that at home. And she's trying to find the guy's son in Colorado to send it to him. And all these great stories are all wonderful. I'm sure glad I came here tonight. Thanks.
Oh. I'll get to you, sir.
Yeah, I won't be very long. I was 10 years old on August 14th, 1945. That's the day that World War II was over. I can remember gas being 12 cents. I remember going to the theater was 12 cents. 12 cents a gallon for gas back then, yes. By the way, that's what it is in Argentina right now, too, if anybody are interested. But I remember the day so vividly because we listened to Gabriel Heater on the radio. And he came on the air at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and he says, "Oh, there's good news tonight." And there sure was, and it wasn't 10 minutes. I lived in an apartment downtown, a second story.
In Lincoln.
In Lincoln, Illinois. And the first chance I ever had to see a mob scene. Now, there were 2 bars within the same block that I was living in. I think they threw away their license. I think we're not going to close at midnight because the streets were packed. People were on the street. They were yelling. They were marching. The cars were going up and down the street. But at 10 years old, like I said, it was my first mob scene.
And in case some of you weren't aware, that's Bill Wheeler.
That's Bill Wheeler. That's right.
I'll get to you next. We had one back in the center here, I think, somewhere. Or was it? Right here.
My comment is I was in the Pacific for the whole World War II. I'm one of the members that meet at the Vet Center for the roundtable group. It's a history lesson every week, every other week. The strange part is World War II was a European theater in the Pacific. Totally different. 2 different wars altogether. There's no comparison between the people that fought in Europe and the ones that fought against the Japanese. It's unbelievable. Thank you.
Okay, and I had one over here, I believe.
Where is the Vet Center and when do you meet and how often?
Yes. Where's the vet center and when do you meet?
It's on 9th and Vine Street. It's across from the unemployment office.
And how often do you meet?
Second and fourth Thursdays of the month.
At what time?
At 10 o'clock, 10 to 11:30. One of the girls from the vet center is supposed to be here tonight. Where's she at?
Oh, there you are. I've been looking for you all
She's
evening.
hiding way over here.
Yeah.
As my sister told you, I'm the oldest one in the family, the oldest child in the family.
Stand up, Sharon.
No, I sit down. And I'd like to tell you a funny story on myself. I was either in 1st or 2nd grade when my dad decided to go into the war. And I lived so close to the school that I came home for lunch. And my mother and dad just looked real down and they said, "Well, we're going to tell you something you're not going to like." And I said, "Do we have to go to the dentist?" I hated to go to the dentist. And my mother, something about my mother that I didn't hear until years later, that she told me that every day she would go to the bathroom and scrub the tub and cry. And I never knew that she did that. I'm sure I knew she went to the bathroom, but I didn't know she went in there and cried every day. So it's just a couple of stories.
Have some more.
Way up and back, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to get this one and then go back that direction, so I'll be back there.
Hi, I'm Jeremiah Warner. I'm 18 years old. I go to Lincoln Land. I just wanted to say to all the veterans and everyone here that was part of World War II, I just want to say thank you, because it's because of what you guys did that I have a free country to live in today. And I have everything that I get, everything that I have, is because of you. And I wanted to say thank you, and you have no idea how much people my age appreciate what you've done. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay, and we'll pass this back.
This is for Ruth. After you had completed your work as a riveter, what did you do to return to civilian life, and how did the life as a riveter affect you in your married life?
It did not affect me. It was a Navy plane that I worked on. It was for the Navy. And after the Navy canceled the contract, I went to work for the Signal Corps. But it did not affect me in any way.
So you went back, tell them about going back to Herrick.
Oh, I went back to the farm, but I became a beautician.
And that's why her hair looks so pretty all the time.
Okay, we've got two people working the mics. Looks like we got the next question back here.
Well, Sandy, I wasn't born quite as early as you were, so.
Oh, you rub it in.
Though I am the son of many uncles. And one of the things I think that was prominent about the stories that I got from my uncles who were World War II veterans was that, in contrast with my father's recollection, because he had a deferment. They printed government contracts in the firm he worked for because Alice Chalmers at the time converted over to make tank tracks for tracked vehicles, and so they printed manuals for it, and he got a deferment. And his brothers and brothers-in-law who went off to war, who joined up immediately or volunteered or were drafted early, immediately sent letters back, please don't enlist, John. Make them come and take you kicking and screaming. It's not as fun out here as you've been led to believe. But my father had, in his later years, a lot of sad feelings in his heart when veterans of the war sat down and began to tell their stories, and he had nothing to tell. And he really felt a sense of being left out in all this, despite his contribution, however it was, despite the contributions of Rosie the Riveter, the people who worked in defense contracts, the people who built the machines of war. Because you could replace a machine of war in a matter of months. It took 18 years to provide another serviceman for everyone that was lost. And I used to try to reconcile him to that fact that you did your part, but there were an awful lot of people left behind who felt a deep sense of regret that they could not participate in the, quote, activities of the war. And I think those people who also served in their whatever ways they can deserve as much gratitude and recognition as we can give them for those, as much as those who did serve in the active theaters.
That's good. You know, as little as we were, Sharon and I did have a job. We lived about 3 blocks from the center of Lincoln, and the depot was right in the center. And the railroad tracks weren't too far from our house, and whenever my mother would hear a train coming, she would grab the two of us and Philip, and if it was a troop train, we had to go out and wave to all the soldiers. And we did that quite a bit, didn't we, sis?
All right, I'm going to switch to the Pacific Theater. My husband was with the B-29s, and I met him at a base area in Great Bend, Kansas, of which I was nursing. I was taking care of all the newborns, of the boys that moved in. And as there was as many boys in that group as we had in town. So he and I met one night on a bed. I walked in after delivering 11 babies that day, and which was babies of the soldiers that were there. And He came down and asked me over a dance. That was on Ash Wednesday, and we were married on the 6th of July. He went overseas, and he was with the B-29s. He also was on Tinian, and when he was right beside the Enola Gay when it took off with the A-bomb.
Do we have any more questions up front here, perhaps? Right over there at the end.
Hi, Ruth. I really have enjoyed listening to you talk about being a riveter. And then you said you were a riveter for how long, and then you went to the Signal Corps for how long? And did you find your work as a riveter difficult for the most part, or was it not difficult?
It was not difficult.
Okay, how long were you with the...
With the Howard aircraft?
Yes.
A year and a half.
And then the Signal Corps, the rest till the end of the war?
Till the end.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right here, right up front.
They made like radios and things like that.
I'm from...
Was there a question as to what the Signal Corps does?
What did you
No,
say?
that's for her.
Oh.
I didn't hear the question.
I'm from a non-military family. My father was 39 during World War II, and my husband was too young. But my dad was called up, and my dad was very much overweight. So he went up to Chicago, and they examined him, and they sent him home and said that it would take too long to get him down to fighting size. The war would probably be over by then.
Well, I wouldn't know how to answer that question. Do we have some more?
No, I was a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, so spent right at 32 years at it. My older brother was being drafted. I went to the draft board with him and went through the questions and so on, and after we were through with him, I asked the gentleman of how long it would be before I would be called up, and he said, what's your age and so on, what's your birthday? I told him. He said, well, if you haven't been called up, but now you're going to be. I said, oh no, I already enlisted. So I enlisted in July of '42, was fortunate enough to get to stay in college for one more year before I had to go into service. All of us talk about things that went on during the war and so on, but peacetime service was not as bad as a lot of people thought so. The organizations that I was with, lucky enough to be with, was more like a family. I had the occasion where my wife had to go to the hospital. She needed blood. We met my commanding officer at the door as we went into the hospital that Sunday day. There wasn't but about an hour, there was at least a half a dozen people there waiting to give blood. So the service life we found to be very good. I have two children, both born while I was in service. One up here at Chanute, Illinois, another one in Hawaii. So it was a good life. I'm proud of it and enjoyed it very, very much. So don't look back on as being something that was bad. Not at all. A lot of it was good, good times. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, sir. Got this one back here, and then he can pass it up to you.
I'm the son of a Korean and World War II veteran who's sitting here, and he leaned over to me and he said, somebody ought to make the point that the country has never been as united as it was during World War II. So I'll turn that into a question for you folks. Do you have any advice for those of us who live in the most divided generation, how we can bring our country together the way it was during World War II?
Somebody here in front said a draft. George, I know you were asked that question in your interview.
No, I don't have a good, I have an answer for it, but I don't want to express it,
Okay.
okay? I'd like to make a little comment here. This picture on the front of your brochure,
Must be Marines.
that was part of the outfit that I was in. I was in the 3rd JASCO, which stands for the 3rd Joint Assault Signal Company. It consisted of the shore party, which this group here that's on here, they were the ones that had the switchboards, the telephones, and the spools of wire that put all the communications with all the troops on any campaign. And then we had what they call the air liaison, which was up in the front lines with the guys up in the front lines that would direct the airstrikes where they were needed to help them out. And the other was in conjunction with the Navy that controlled the fire from the ships to shore and out to the front lines. So that's why that is. And in this picture here, 2 of the fellows that's on here was killed whenever we landed on Guam. Where am I at?
I know where he's at.
I'm the 3rd one down on the front side there without any clothes on.
Yeah, he's without his shirt. Woo-hoo. You know, George, I know this question was asked when Mark and I spent the day at your house with you and Dorothy. But I really wanted to know, where'd you learn how to cook?
I didn't. I just picked up a loaf of bread. I made a peanut butter sandwich, and then they wanted to know if I knew anything else, so I put a little bit of jelly on it.
And that's how he got the job to cook for generals.
All right, now this is coming from 1940. In 1944, in the 40s. In 1941, I graduated from high school, and the next week I went to work for the telephone company. 1941, I was out in Chatham driving around when I heard about Pearl Harbor. In 1942, I spent the whole year trying to get in the Navy, in the Air Force. I couldn't do it. I couldn't make what had to be done. So I gave up on that. In 1943, I joined the Navy. I didn't join the Army because I wasn't going to sleep on the damn ground, and I wasn't going to drink their coffee because I drank milk. Now that's the idea of a teenager in 1941.
Well, you should have been right at home in the Navy, because all the coffee I got, it always tastes like milk. They had so much milk in it.
We're going to take just a couple more questions because it's getting a little bit on the late side, but I don't want to cut it off too early. There's some great questions and comments here.
You have one over here, Mark.
Sir?
Yeah, I would like to hear from both Mr. and Mrs. Cordier what the most difficult part of the war was for you.
George, did you hear that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I heard it. Well, the most difficult part was leaving. Whenever I went into the service, I got on the train, went to Paris Island, God's gift to the people. And we went from Washington, D.C. down to Beaufort, South Carolina. And I think we spent the whole night backing up rather than going forward. We'd go a little bit, and then we'd go back up. And then whenever we got to Beaufort, the Marine sergeants came aboard, and that's when the day we become Marines. And it was this and that, and the thing of it is, I was there for 6 weeks, got a 15-day furlough, come home, went back to New River, and went through telephone school. And after that, we got aboard a train on the next day and went out to Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, California, and trained a little bit there. And the new outfit, 3rd JASCO, was formed, and I was picked to go in it, and we had done a few exercises there. And we went aboard ship on April 11th and went overseas, and I didn't come back until in December of 1945. And
Dorothy?
was discharged in January of 46.
What was the hardest part for you? He asked both of you.
The hardest part? The hardest part for me was being lonely. I kind of missed him, and it was 23 months of just being alone with my child and having to work and just waiting for him to come home, and the horrible things about the war that I didn't like about it. And it was just lonesome for me because as I don't know, it was just bored and more or less every day. And it was nice when he came home, I'll tell you. It was to start our life all over again, and because there was a pause of 23 months where I just figured it was just not there anymore. And now I have him for 66 years, and I hope I have him for a little bit longer.
But the only thing that I'm not quite happy with, they didn't put any makeup on me so I could be as handsome as Bill Wheeler.
Yeah, but your hair matches his.
This is to all of the World War II veterans. It's veterans that are returning home from war now are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. It wasn't recognized as a disorder for World War II veterans, but you must have gone through a stressful time upon your return after having been in combat. I would like to hear from either from George or other veterans how they dealt with that stress upon return after having been in a combat situation.
Well, myself, I didn't seem to have it whenever I come back, post the stress. I was just happy to be home and get on with my life.
I think our gentleman here from Poland has something to say about the subject.
Yes, I wrote a book, and I gave the name of the book, It Was Worth It. It is in Springfield Library.
And what's your name so we can look it up?
It was worth it.
What's your name?
My name?
Yes.
is
Have to look by author.
Kazimir Ladny. Okay. Kazimir Ladny.
Thank you.
Kazimir, like Kazimir Pulaski.
Gotcha.
And Ladny, Ladny. And
Ladny. Okay.
my last sentence in my book it was worth it, and God bless America.
Okay, let's take just one more question.
You've got Kathy Smith right
Yeah,
there.
And if we have any more questions, I'll ask our panel members to stay up there for just a couple more minutes after this over, and people can make their way up. So, ma'am, you've got the last question.
Well, the gentleman behind me asked if the World War II veterans had any advice for the younger veterans. I really don't think we do, because The World War II was so different from the wars today. During World War II, everybody in the country was at war. Nowadays, when they have a war, we read about it in the paper, but we do not get as involved as everybody did in World War II. And I really feel badly about that for the younger veterans.
Okay, I think what we'd like to do then, Kimberly, I know that we have some closing comments, and then we'll kind of let people go, and if they want to come up and chat with our panel members, that would be super. That's right.
Of WILL, we thank everyone for coming. I learned a lot. I appreciate all the sharing, both from our panelists and from you, the audience. We hope that you will tune in and watch the War series on WILL TV beginning September 23rd. That's a Sunday, 7 hours, from the perspective of those who fought and those who served and sacrificed at home as well. We have videotaped tonight's panel. We hope to edit that and put it on our website. We hope to archive on our website all the oral histories that we have gathered in conjunction with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. So there's much more discussion to be had. I appreciate everyone that came, and I thank all the staff that did the work and those of you who are willing to share your stories. Thank you very much.
I'm away from my notes, so I hope I can remember everybody, but I want to especially, and start with our panel members, and let's give them a round of applause. When you put something like this together, you're not sure how it's going to turn out. This kind of exceeded my expectations, I think. And it's because of the audience here and because of our panel members. I really appreciate everybody showing up and participating, and hope this stimulates a lot more discussion and curiosity and conversation about the war, about the other memories they have, about the other projects that we're working on. Growing up in rural Illinois, for example, Illinois politics, things like that. I do want to thank a lot of people here as we close. I don't know if she's still in the room, but Linda B., are you out there someplace? Linda B. is our volunteer coordinator, and it's because of her and Jeremy Carroll and all of the volunteer support that I get that I'm able to be successful in putting together a program. I could say I'm a one-man staff. I'm the only guy in a position, but we have wonderful volunteers here throughout the museum and the library, and they make this institution work. I want to thank Sam Cooper and his people, who are the technicians that run this operation, and you can see for yourselves just how superb they do that. I want to thank the people who aren't necessarily here tonight, the information technology folks, the people I have to turn to all the time whenever I have a glitch or a question about computers, because what we're doing is very demanding in terms of the new technology we got. We want to get these interviews eventually on the internet. And when I walked into the job, I couldn't begin to comprehend the challenges that represents, but Trey McGee and his staff have been super as well. Sabrina Nancy for helping do a lot of the behind-the-scenes coordination, and also finally, Carl and Kimberly for you being here and giving us this opportunity. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the evening, and with that, we'll close and we'll hopefully give you a chance to get our panel members.